Motor outs are not a question of if, they are a question of when. And when it happens, it is a question of how is it going to be and what is going to happen in the end. As a paramotor pilot, you should always be flying as if your motor is about to die right then and there. This means you should always have glide to a safe landing zone into the wind. However, us paramotor pilots get a little bit sloppy and we tend to struggle nailing our glide slope. That is how far forward for how far down you go. As a paramotor pilot, you should be able to consistently nail a tight landing zone, motor on, motor off, regardless of where you started. If you don't have that skill set, it is one of the most important things that you should build as a pilot. In today's video, I'm going to outline some of the things you can practice, some ways and techniques you can use to increase your consistency at landing on target, and some exercises that are worth practicing. Stay tuned and let's get started.
All right, guys, so here we are, laid out, ready to rock and roll. I want to go up there and discuss some of the reasons why I think this is so important. We just wrapped up one of our adventure training classes here at Backcountry PPG, and one of the things I prioritized most was ensuring that students could nail their engine-out landings in a tight spot. And part of that is understanding a couple ways to lose altitude in that so that you can make a tighter LZ if you need to. And so in today's video, I want to discuss a couple of the ways you can lose altitude to send in on the LZ of your choice. If you're trying to make a certain landing zone, you're trying to make a certain tight spot, you don't have a go around, your engine's died, you're too high, how can you lose altitude? How can you sink into the LZ and nail the landing even when there's no go-arounds? So, you know, if you've got an engine out and there's one spot to land in, you've got to have that confidence and you've got to have the skill to actually nail that landing without hesitation. You know, if it's just the side of a road, it's the side of a highway, it's in between a whole bunch of trees, you need to know how to get yourself down and get yourself into that LZ. Okay, so the first way you can start to lose altitude is just a gradual 360 turn. All right, you look, clear your direction, you lean, you pull some brake. Now, you need to be careful with these 360 turns that you don't overcommit, because you could overcommit being too low to do the 360, and you end up doing the 360 kind of into the ground, or where you don't make it all the way back around to the direction of the wind, and ultimately you land downwind or crosswind or miss the spot. Now, the other thing with these 360s, you can widen the 360s, tighten the 360s. It's just a way of bringing you away from what you're trying to land on and allowing you to burn off that altitude beforehand. I like these, but these are, like I said, fully committed. You're not backing out of the 360 once you're going into it. You can ease off it, you could tighten it, but you can't just like stop the 360 and be into the wind. So if you're really low, I tend not to opt in for the 360 turn. I tend to opt in for the S turns, which we'll talk about in a second. But if I'm high, I will do the 360s. And I'll do the 360s really, really wide. If I'm really far away, I'll almost like fly straight away from the landing spot and then bring it back around. I try to never gravitate too far away. I like to kind of stay closer to what I'm trying to land on and just burn the altitude kind of next to it and sink in. So example, if I'm trying to land at the end of these hay bales, you know, like right there or whatever, I don't want to like drift myself way away from that. I kind of want to stay near this and burn off the altitude kind of close to it like this, where I'm, you know, pretending here. Burning altitude, burning altitude, burning altitude, not flying too far away from it so that I don't miss and I actually am able to drop in right on target. Versus like flying super far away and then trying to glide in, because you can't really gain altitude, you can't get more altitude in the real world when you have an engine out. You can only burn off altitude. So I always err on being closer to the LZ as I burn off that altitude than further from it and try to glide in. Now, that is your 360s. Let's talk about S turns. Now, S turns are kind of a broad thing. Because an S-turn is essentially where you draw an S and or half of an 8, right? Where you go like this, and then you turn this way, and you go like this, right? Now, I love S-turns, and this is going to be often what I opt for over the 360s just because they're not as committed. So example, if I'm coming into this LZ and I need to lose some altitude because my engine died and I'm trying to land on this half of the field. Well, right here, I wouldn't want to do a 360 because if I started to do the 360, you know, I start 360 and I was obviously too low for it, but we start 360 and now I'm far away. I'm just trying to maximize my glide here and make it back. You're really committed. If I'm even lower and I do the 360, I'm just really committed. Whereas S-turns, if we go around and do this hypothetical again, right? Whereas S-turns, let's say I'm trying to bring it in again, I can add to the S-turn easily. I can remove from it easily. I'm never overcommitted. I'm staying towards my landing zone. I'm ready for it. All right, I fly a little further this way. I keep going this way because I've got some more altitude. I can bring it back over here, but I'm always ready to exit my S-turn and bring it in, right? And then I can bring it back over here, and then I can swoop it around and drag it in on field. And I like those S-turns because I almost have more control of how much altitude I'm burning off, how far I'm burning it, and, you know, gauging my distance real time. The 360, you're just kind of pointing away, and it's kind of hard to gauge that. It's doable, but it's not as easy. So I tend to opt for those S-turns. Now this is a drill that I highly, highly value in the real world. Example, you know, here's my landing zone. If I go for a 360, let's go for a left 360. You know, I can kind of gauge how far I am, but now I have no idea. I'm looking like over my shoulder, trying to gauge how far I am. I don't personally love that. I prefer to instead do a comparable S-turn. So let's regain a little altitude. Right, so in the same environment, I would prefer to go for S-turns, even if I point the S-turns slightly away. Right, so I could point them slightly away, but then I bring them back, and I have almost more control over my glide slope. I have a better feel for it because I'm seeing the LZ, I'm feeling it out as we go, versus the 360 where I'm kind of pointing away, and then I'm kind of stuck with whatever it is that I have. And see, I made the field. Now the exact drill I'm doing right now, where I'm just practicing gliding in, is something I would highly, 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 highly recommend to any paramotor pilot, new or experienced, on every wing you get. So now I'll climb up and I'll go into a different spot. Now I'll pretend my engine died, all right? Now I'm gonna go and work my way back. The first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna kind of itch my way closer to the landing zone. I wanna be closer to it and burning altitude, not further from it, trying to maximize my glide. I'd rather have a little more altitude and have to burn it off than have enough altitude. All right, so first thing I get kind of close to it, and then I start to do my S-turny thing. I'm watching the LZ, keeping my eye on it. I can add to the S-turn if I need to. I can remove from it. I can slow this turn down. Right? I can bite the turn in a little harder. I can kind of keep it going this way a little longer before I curve it back this way. And then I can curl it around and in right on target once again. Same spot. And this is a drill, by the way, that I will do a dozen times or more on a regular basis with every new glider that I get. this is something that you'll never be good enough at. Despite the fact that I nailed the exact spot 3 different times, I still want to practice over and over again. So now we'll go over here and we'll put ourselves in a different situation. Now our engine died, right? Hypothetical. I like to flatten out. Whenever I have an engine out, I don't like to be doing big, aggressive turns. I like to flatten out a little bit more, keep my glide a little better, because when I'm flat, I can gauge my glide slope better than if I'm angled. If I dive myself in, it's a little harder for me to gauge that glide slope. Whereas flat, I can kind of feel it out a little more. Right, I can go this way a little bit more and bring it around. I just like to keep my wing flat and, you know, wingtip above the horizon when I'm trying to do engine out landings. Now, I'm like, what, 4 for 4 on landing in the exact same spot or gliding in on the exact same spot. Let's see if I can make that 5 for 5. I probably have it. See, I can do these S-turns and then straighten it back in a little bit, and then go a little this way, and then drift it around this way, and I was exactly on target. So you can kind of see, you can add to that glide slope, or you can add to that S-turn any time. You can kind of increase the distance, decrease the distance. You can like play with it if you've got altitude to play with. If you don't have any altitude, and you know, if I'm way over here, and then I try and work my way in, right? I burn off altitude over here, and I'm burning, whatever. I'm all the way over here, and then I'm like, oh yeah, I think I got it, and I start to crank it in, and I just go for like this straight on approach. I almost feel at more risk because there's a higher likelihood of landing short in this way. Right? I need to nail that glide slope for a longer period of time. I can't like burn off more. I suppose I can, but if I overcommit over there, it's a lot harder for me to burn off that altitude, and if I'm too low. So now we're gonna slice it right in between this pole and the truck, and see, I actually was slightly off on that one because I tried to burn the altitude further away. So I like to be closer before I do that. Now it's always good just to like suddenly act as if your engine died and see if you've got glide back to where you're hoping to land. Now see, if I go for an overcommit here, right, I don't want to be overly committed and turning downwind low. I want to only be crosswind because I want to still be able to make the LZ. So if you're lower and you don't have the engine on, you don't want to turn downwind as well, because if you turn downwind and you don't have enough altitude to crank it all the way around, you're making a crosswind or downwind landing, and that's ugly. So if the engine dies, what I really don't want to do is just like immediately crank it downwind, because now I'm like super committed, and thankfully I have enough altitude, but I may not have enough to like make it back into the wind. So like example here, I wouldn't want to like overcommit this way downwind, because now I don't have enough altitude to bring it all the way around into the wind, as you can see. And so when that engine's off, when I'm practicing that glide slope, I'm very aware of the wind direction and which way I'm facing, because let's pretend, again, I'm like doing my S-turns downwind, you know, instead of crosswind. I'm always trying to do them crosswind or into the wind, not downwind, because now, hypothetical situation here, I'm going to turn around into that wind, right? I don't got it. I'm landing crosswind. I almost had it, but I don't quite got it. So I'm always instead burning altitude crosswind or into the wind. Into the wind is obviously the most ideal. Crosswind is if you've got like a tight spot. And one of the things that I think is important for a above brand new beginner student to be practicing is a change in direction landing approach. So a beginner class like we host here at Backcountry, I'll always try and land a student as perfectly straight as possible. I don't want them thinking about turns, right? I'm gonna bring them over here, and we're gonna straighten out straight into the field, and then we're gonna like do nothing else but glide straight in. And that is exactly what you want for a brand new pilot. But for a slightly more advanced pilot, you want to be able to be slightly crosswind and somewhere around 30, 50 feet, slowly, gradually bring it around into the wind and set it down. Because in the real world, you may not have the ability to just go straight on to your landing spot. You may have to do a little turn. You may have to do a 180. You may have to do a 90 degree. You may have to do all these kind of turns. You should be able to, like, oh, motor died right here. Yeah, obviously I wouldn't even try for this 360. I would just go straight. I was way too low. But can you do a, 90 degree turn where you're crosswind coming in about the height of the trees or so, start to gradually turn it left, nothing too sharp, super flat, and set it down into the wind. You want to be able to nail that skill, because if you can't and all you've got is straight on, well, that means that in order for you to nail your spot, you got to go downwind far enough, and you may not have that because there's power lines or because there's a hill or a mountain. So I'm going to bring it in. I think you guys have understood this concept. This turned into a lot more about a motor out glide slope conversation. In paragliding, the pilots have to know their glide slope really well because they never have a motor. And they use big ears and stuff to help them burn altitude. There are some techniques in paragliding that don't directly translate to paramotoring. You can use them, but paramotor wings are really not designed to do big ears, whereas paragliding wings are designed to do big ears. And so we tend not to do big ears. Nailed it. But they will do the same S turns, 180 turns kind of things that we do. They have to be really good at it because they don't have a go-around. They never, ever had a go-around. Whereas paramotor pilots, we have that go-around. So those are a couple things to think about. That was a lot more about glide slope practice, understanding your glide slope and ways to glide in on target in a better manner, a more consistent way. And as you just saw, I just practiced that half a dozen times, a dozen times. That's something that I would highly, highly, highly recommend to all paramotor pilots. Definitely do that. Practice that as much as you can. Do that on a regular basis. I do it almost every flight. I actually kill the motor at like 1,000 feet and glide it in, especially if you change altitude. So if I go from Utah at 5,000 feet to here at negative 200 feet, well, my glide slope's a little different. The air's thicker. We glide a little further. I like to reacclimate, as I say, to my new glide slope by practicing it. And it may only take a couple times, me practicing, to like be nailing the landing spot every single time. But if I never practice it and I just venture off into the real world and all of a sudden I have a motor out and I've got to nail like a super tight spot and I have no confidence, I haven't been doing it, and my consistency is probably lower. So by practicing like I just did, it increases your consistency, so your hit rate on nailing a tight spot every single time goes up. It's like put your stuff bag out there and just practice gliding in. You don't even have to land. Like I didn't land a single time, but I practiced over and over and over again. All right, well, that's all I got for today's videos, guys. I hope you guys appreciate this. Thank you for watching. Please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. If you are looking to learn how to fly, check us out at backcountryppg.com. We sell wings, motors, reserves, accessories, parts, all of the things. We've even got stock coming of a couple different paramotor brands. Be happy to help you out. My name is Trevor Steele. I'll see you guys next time.